Our breaking news tonight: President Trump's national address to the American public about the war with Iran. It was a full sell to the American people. The president used his time mostly to justify why the United States began the conflict in the first place. He signaled that the U.S. is prepared to hit Iran hard in the coming weeks.
We are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Trump also repeated his warnings about Iran's stockpile of ballistic missiles as he sought to explain the war to the American public.
They were also rapidly building a vast stockpile of conventional ballistic missiles and would soon have had missiles that could reach the American homeland, Europe, and virtually any other place on Earth. Iran's strategy was so obvious. They wanted to produce as many missiles as possible, and they did.
Trump has previously offered similar assessments, but sources have told CNN that there is no intelligence suggesting that Iran is pursuing a missile program targeting the United States. And these long-range missiles that he's warning about were much farther into the future than he let on. It is an important question, actually, the truthfulness of a lot of what he said there. He talked about the ballistic missile threat. He talked about the nuclear threat. He claimed that they were trying to rebuild, which contradicts what his own administration has said about that in recent months. So, do the American people have more clarity or less tonight?
I think they have a lot less. And I think, what we saw just the minor ticks on what was happening with oil suggests that the markets think we have less. I think we'll see more of what is happening with the American people when the initial polling comes out about this. But, I think he has this problem of mixing in obvious problems, falsehoods, in with what he could have said, which part of it, when he started off smartly on the speech, was these are the things that we have destroyed. These are incontrovertible facts. There's no military greater than the U.S. military. That's smart. Mixing in all of the numbers that nobody can verify, he went from him saying on February 28th that there were 32,000 protesters killed. Tonight, that number jumped by 13,000 people to 45,000 protesters killed. When were these protesters killed? The other 13,000? No one has any reference for that. This idea of talking about what Obama did not do with the Iran deal that he had, well, in fact, what he left out of that was that deal was multinational, including also Russia and China. It had inspectors, and they were able to get out 97% of Iran's nuclear stockpiles with that deal. Tonight, he's basically saying, this stuff is buried in the rubble. We're not going to even touch it. Obama got 97% of it out. We're just going to leave it all within their reach. It's kind of insane what he said.
Well, if I might, he said that it's very deep because we've destroyed this area on top of it, and we're monitoring it with satellites. And if they try to go anywhere near it, we'll bomb those people. I mean, we have a military expert here who can explain this maybe a little better. But what I understood is that at this moment, we basically have air superiority over Iran and the surveillance to see if they're doing anything with the material that's left. Those are two good things, no?
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm going through the military objectives that he laid out, we're just going to objectively look at what he had stated. The Iranians, about a month beforehand, said, hey, we're not looking to pursue longer-range ballistic missiles. They then went and attacked Diego Garcia with 2, which was twice the distance of the known capabilities they had previously. So they were trying to extend the missiles. The time frame for when they would get to an intercontinental ballistic missile hit the United States is unclear, and nobody's really laid that out from an intelligence perspective, so we'll have to just take that for what it's worth at the moment. This was a missile math game, so the Israelis did say that 6 months after the start of this operation, they would have had to initiate something because the Iranians were building something like 300 ballistic missiles a month. They were thought to have between 2,000 and 3,000 medium-range missiles, and that's the ones that were launched principally at Israel, and then 6,000 to 8,000 short-range are the stuff that they're launching at their neighbors, that's all the Arab states that are around them. And those have now been struck as well as the launchers going after them. So anyway, if you take all those numbers and put them together and the ability to intercept them, we were basically 6 months out from when a strike would have had to happen because somebody would have had to do something. The U.S. or Israel, we wouldn't have been able to defend against it. Then you take the nuke problem set. This is where it's a little less clear. They were about 2 weeks away from having enough fuel for about 11 weapons. They had 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium from 60% to 90% if they still had all of the centrifuge technology. So as the president said, now we've moved from that to we're going to have a persistence there, and now there's been some leaks in the press that the operation, if we had to go get it, would be pretty substantive. So I think there's been an evolution in the mission set. I think the president was briefed, basically, is what I'm reading the tea leaves. This is probably a little bit more he wants to do. Could this be deception covering a potential operation in the future? Does he not want to do it?
You're saying it's more than
Yeah.
he wants to do?
I think so.
To go in and actually get it, so he's just gonna leave it and we're just gonna.
Because I think
He was just bringing boots on the ground tonight, but he did talk about the satellites. I thought that was noteworthy.
Well, look, I mean, the satellites are it is noteworthy for exactly the reason that you're pointing out, because what it really means is that we're committing to a long-term commitment of essentially bombing Iran forever if they ever try to get this material. And I think that is important for the American people to understand that we're not taking it off the table. We're just saying that we're going to continuously have to deal with it forever, which seems to be kind of where we were before.
Well, I think we're definitely in a different position than where we were before. To Alex's point, to Scott's point, their Air Force is not capable of defending Iran's homeland, so to speak. The United States and Israel has done a good job with that. I do think President Trump tonight was very methodological. He was trying to make a point that this is not going to be a forever war. I think that's the reason you saw him reference World War I, World War II, the Korean War. I think he was trying to reassure Americans who are concerned that this can turn into something prolonged, but this is not his goal. His goal is to ideally get in and out. And he told us originally that the time frame was 4 to 6 weeks. We're at the, 4.5 week mark now. So if this operation does conclude in 2 to 3 weeks, like he said it would, that would just be a week or so out of his initial time frame, which I think for President Trump would be a success both militarily, that we got in and out within 6 to 7 weeks, and also that he can say, look, I told you we were going in for this, X, Y, Z, I told you we were getting out here, I pretty much met all of those goals, just as I said, and I think that might be a way for him to kind of reassure Americans and hopefully win back some, voters for the midterms.
The idea that he was reassuring Americans that this won't be a forever war was contradicted by what we were just talking about. They're setting up perpetual oversight in the air so they can perpetually see what Iran is doing, and there's a chance we might have to perpetually strike them over and over, just like we did 8 or 9 months ago, just like we did again. And if we don't actually get the enriched uranium, this will turn into a military treadmill where every 8 months or so we're continuing to strike them over and over. And I want to make this point again: the main weapon systems that were actually a threat to us are still intact. You obviously know better than I do, but their Navy was gifted to them 55 years ago. It's ancient. Their Air Force was gifted to them 55 years ago. It's ancient. Their Air Force could have laps run around it by like one of our planes. So I see people at this table or on TV sitting here and trying to pull all these examples of how we've won. Oh, we destroyed their Air Force. We destroyed their Navy. This isn't a substantive win in any meaningful way. We destroyed an ancient Air Force. We killed an 86-year-old Supreme Leader who had cancer and replaced him with a 30-year younger son who is more extreme, more radical. They're purging the moderates right there. I think that Iran's thought process right now is, you know what, we need to back off the nukes, no more nukes. Iran's thought process is we need to accelerate. We need to at some point get nukes and stop this from happening.
Let me play,
You
this is a
agree?
reaction
Do
just
you agree with his
moments ago.
military assessments?
I think the two pieces that are not completely clear yet, just in the objectives that are left, there's about 3,000 targets left. We've struck 13,000 targets. The CENTCOM commander says there's 3,000 left over the next 2 to 3 weeks. What that encompassed would be the remainder of the industrial base associated with the missiles and the drones. The missiles, I think we can really get to. I think the problem in the long range is going to be the drones, because you only need a couple of those to be able to strike ships, so that's going to be a perpetual problem from an asymmetric standpoint for shutting down or keeping the straits held at risk if they choose to in the future afterwards, if they're not able to get everything else. And then to your point about the nuclear piece, it is a persistent, perpetual stare afterwards if the highly enriched uranium doesn't come out of there, which will require persistent monitoring. The alternative to that would be a very large ground operation with a very significant risk to U.S. forces. That facility where most of it is stored is 300 miles inland, completely surrounded by mountains, 15 kilometers outside the third largest city in the country. That would require probably a large blocking force, somebody going inside to get it. And I think there's a trade-off basically between the risk to U.S. forces and having to actually.
Well, let me add a third scenario. I mean, there is a third option, which is diplomacy, which has always been
Absolutely.
an option. And that's actually one of the things that Trump said very little about today. He didn't seem to have a whole lot to say about what kind of diplomatic outcome. And I just want to play, this is just coming in, the Prime Minister of Australia responding to what Trump said today, and basically saying he also has a lot of questions.
Despite its indiscriminate attacks across the region, Iran's air force is degraded, its navy is degraded, its military industrial base is degraded, and so too is its capacity to launch missiles. That is a good thing. And now those objectives have been realised. It is not clear what more needs to be achieved or what the end point looks like.
Because I think the rest of the world understands that while perpetual stare, perpetual surveillance is possible, I don't think that's what anybody really wants, is a world in which we are perpetually on the verge of bombing. And we also know that the material that we want out is still there, still inside of Iran.
You don't think people want to perpetually surveil Iran?
Yeah, but we had a
Okay,
bad,
We're surveilling them.
I'm
We're surveilling
sorry,
North Korea.
Well, I don't
China.
think
We're
the
surveilling all of our.
I don't think the American people want to perpetually bomb anyone
the J-
because it costs money to do that. It is not free. Bombing perpetually is not free. And it also doesn't ultimately solve the problem. The radicalization, the sponsorship of terrorism, the regime itself that still has as its objective being a blind actor, it doesn't solve that problem.
we are in a much worse position, and he has done a much worse job than what Obama and the rest of the world did through diplomacy. The JCPOA had inspectors on the ground, but there's a limit capability of satellite surveillance. We can see soil being moved, we can see trucks moving up to entrances, we can see things like that. It does not give you the ability to see how much you are increasing capacity, enriching materials, whether or not locations change from the ones that we are surveilling now to another location. That was what the 2015 agreement gave us, and it had the entire world, including China and Russia, signed on to that agreement. The fact that we are now saying we're going to leave these things here, we're going to trust the rubble. We're going to trust the rubble to protect it, rather than people on the ground to inspect it, or actual people moving it out of the country. It's a much worse situation. And then they complain that Obama unfroze the $1.7 billion for Iranian funds. Iran has made twice as much by selling their oil because they're the only people moving oil through the Strait of Hormuz. How is this better than what you scrapped?
Scott?
Well, number one, taking away their ability over a long period of time to fire missiles, to have an aggressive navy, and to see any profit in being the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, I think is a good thing. On the nuclear piece, I'm not in full disagreement with you about can you just trust the rubble forever. There is one other player here that we haven't discussed, and that's Israel. They may not want to trust the rubble, and the other Gulf states may not want to trust the rubble either. And we didn't hear much about this tonight. I'm just wondering, in the diplomatic conversations that are going on, are the other players going to say, well, you know what, if you don't want to do that, we may want to do that, and that may be how it works out. So I think that's an unsaid
can
piece
the
of
other
way to
players,
No, explain it out. Now, what is Iran's incentive to come up with any sort of deal if not all the players are not involved in that deal? Number two, it has taught them that they are stronger than they thought they were. They were able to squeeze the Strait of Hormuz and actually extract a toll on the world, and it has worked. And Donald Trump is suggesting that they may just walk away and it will naturally release. It will naturally be opened back up by just the course of events. The Iranians may not want that to happen at all, and we will also suffer from that, including in addition to other people around the world, and they will continue to make money hand over fist from doing that.
So Scott's suggesting also that other countries could go in and take it, could they?
I mean, it's possible. So the original plan this summer, if Midnight Hammer didn't happen, was for one of the regional forces to send in the Special Operations Force to go in and go retrieve the material if necessary as a potential backup. But I think you actually hit the point. It was the third point that we haven't discussed yet, which is diplomacy. So if you're going to do this, you're going to degrade the rest of the capabilities that we're going after, the missiles, the drones, everything else that poses a threat. The nuclear program will be the last thing that you go after. There has been diplomacy playing out in the background. It is one of the last levers that the Iranians have. They are approaching this differently than any of our exercises have to date. Because people say, how do we end up in this position? The straits closing, everything else. All of our exercises to date were predicated upon the strikes being the the nuclear program and the missiles. It didn't begin with an opening decapitating strike on all of the senior leadership, which had them responding from an existential threat, which is how the straits were being closed by risk. So now that they've done that, right, what are we going to do? The president basically said, look, I'm not going to get sucked into this. That's what they want me to do to go in, as I think where they kind of realized what the military options were. So you know what? I've got 2 or 3 weeks of bombing left. Let's leave that off to the side for right now. They're going to negotiate in the background. We don't know where the Iranians will land, but their whole position is the regime wants to survive. This is about regime survival for them. And if they can get the regime to survive on some sort of terms that they want without an unconditional surrender, then there's a chance that they'll open things up and deal with it afterwards. From the president's perspective, he said, look, I'm not going to engage in state building. What happened in Iraq was a disaster. I'm not going to go do that. I'd rather deal with remnants of the government's left. I have no idea where it's going to land. They're negotiating with the Speaker of Parliament in the background. I think we'll know over the next week to 10 days where that goes and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, look, they just do need to survive, and under that circumstance, Trump has already said it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks, and then our military objectives will be over. They don't have to make a deal. They don't. They can just keep the status quo, wait it out, keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, keep the leverage on the world. That's the other scenario that is very possible, if not more likely.
So I think in that case, if that does happen, talking to some of the Gulf states and folks that are there was a 6-month gap between the 12-day war and when the protests erupted in January. So the deep-seated economic issues are still there. If they don't come to a deal and they don't, and there's the retained material, whatever else, they will remain, I believe, diplomatically and economically isolated, and conditions are going to get worse. So most of the folks that I talk to believe that will end up with people in the streets eventually. Again, this is not over.
Next for us,